What's up, girlfriends? Welcome to Girlfriend Therapy Podcast. I'm taking a deep breath because I am so excited about my guests that I have this week. But I will say, you guys know we're doing our year of conversations, and I have been having some of the most amazing conversations. And today marks our 46th conversation. So we are winding down the year, guys. And I am so thrilled, so honored, so excited to have my beautiful, beautiful guest, Miss LaQuisha Hall. Let me
Oh,
tell you
thank
guys,
you.
thank you for being here. Let me tell you guys a little bit about LaQuisha. She is a teacher by trade, and she's an advocate for women and children who are victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse. She has two different campaigns that she does every year. One in April for sexual abuse, which is Reveal Your Teal. The other one that she does in October, which is Restore Your Royalty. I love both of those. We'll hear more about both of those throughout the conversation, I'm sure. But she's also less than 24 hours crowned, as you guys can see on her beautiful sash and her beautiful crown. I should have worn my crown, but her beautiful sash.
You are wearing your crown.
There you go. She has been crowned Miss Maryland International. We're gonna hear so much more about that. I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited just watching you with your beautiful purple dress on, your crown, your sash. I can't wait to hear more. But LaQuisha is also an author. She's an artist, as you can see her beautiful portraits behind her. We're going to learn so much more about her, and I am so excited. So I'm going to be quiet because there's so much you guys want to know. So LaQuisha, first of all, Miss Maryland International, thank you so much for joining us for Girlfriend Therapy Podcast.
Absolutely. I wouldn't have had it any other way. I absolutely adore you and how you've encouraged me over the years. So thank you.
Same here. And it's so interesting. I was thinking as we were preparing for the conversation, I'm like, we've known of each other for at least 8 years, probably longer.
Yeah.
And so, but we've never actually engaged. Like we've never sat across the table from one another, which is one of my favorite things to do. And we have to make that happen. But one of my things I love most is we did like a book exchange a couple of years ago, and that was so much fun. But I just think that, you are one of those people that's just an all around positive, yet engaging, yet an advocate at heart. I follow you on social media. I see your posts, whether it's, domestic violence, whether it's child abuse, whether it's social, political issues. You are on the front line. And you are very vocal, and I appreciate it. I'm always like cheer you on from the sidelines, but I adore you, and I'm so glad that you're here with us today. I can't wait for the rest of our Girlfriend Therapy audience to get to know you and to hear from you directly. So I'm going to throw it over to you. But one of the things I did want to just kind of kick the conversation is if you can just tell us how, like, first of all, where are you from, where you grew up, and how did you get to be Miss Maryland International?
Well, I will tell you, it was a long ways away from where I started. So I have a little bit of a Southern drawl. You could probably pick that up. I'm from North Carolina, and proudly so. And when I say North Carolina, I'm talking about super country, had a pet hog behind the house, kind of North Carolina.
Oh my.
And living in Maryland now and working in Baltimore is very different from how I was raised. And so I grew up in a Christian home. I also encountered a lot of trauma in the home in my youth and my childhood. And so I needed a champion. I didn't have one. And it caused a lot of the detriment that followed in my life. And so when you say, how did I get here? I got here because I think I needed to see what I didn't see growing up.
Right.
Yeah.
So you said you needed a champion, an advocate. So you became the advocate that you didn't see as a child. Oh my God. That's about to make me cry because that is, that's powerful, first of all. And the level of commitment is because a lot of times people can be so broken, growing up in a traumatic household and all that they become so broken that they can't even see the forest for the trees to even be able to support and be there to advocate for other people. So for you to have been able to do that, like that's incredible.
Now, it wasn't easy.
I bet.
A part of that journey was my own healing process from that trauma, which was incredibly rocky. Even as I am an advocate against domestic violence and sexual abuse, there's so many other issues that I also speak about openly, as you mentioned earlier, because they affected me as a result of the abuse. So like I suffered from suicidal thoughts. I had a lot of anxiety and depression growing up, as well as feeling abandonment. And it was just so many things. I don't think our society understands how these issues of domestic violence and sexual abuse roll up a lot of other issues. Like, you can't talk about them in isolation without confronting mental health, without talking about financial literacy. A lot of times it just is so much involved with trying to help people get to the next part of their lives.
Exactly. And I was going to say, even when you mentioned that, like, I think poverty, and it's not even just a poverty issue, but I think poverty does play a role in it. And then we don't think about the generational effects of it, you know, not just from the one who's being abused, but the abuser as well. And just trying to unpack that, and even, and I don't even know, you can correct me, but even trying to hold space for grace. Is that a part of your healing process, holding space for grace for the abuser?
Yes, that came much later.
Yeah, for sure.
Initially, I just wanted all abusers to be heavily and severely punished. I won't tell you honestly that I still don't believe that there should be punishment involved, but
absolutely.
I do believe that there should be restoration for all parties involved. I don't think there's enough support and services for that, not just the abusers, but also the victims and survivors.
Wow. So if you, and I don't know if you're comfortable with sharing, but I imagine being on a platform, can you share a little bit about your story? Like, are you an only child? Were you raised in a two-parent household? Like,
yeah, so I was raised in a two-parent household. That's where I encountered the domestic violence between my two parents. And so one of the things that I discuss with communities and groups and people in general is that we often think about domestic violence between two intimate partners. We don't consider the children who are witnessing it and how it affects them. They also are surviving that situation. And so a lot of times we also learn that in witnessing the violence as a child, you could perpetuate that as an adult. And so I think it's important. I'm always telling people, don't forget about the children, because I was that child. I suffered from hearing when I would hear loud noises or arguments, or if fighting happened in school, I would immediately become tense. Because it was like a trigger of violence, of the violence I experienced at home. But also, I think that one of the things also that happened in growing up was, once my parents finally divorced, you would think we could move on to the next part of our lives. But the truth is, my mother was in a very vulnerable space. She was trying to heal from what she experienced. I lived with her along with my two younger sisters. And as a result, someone preyed, I think, on her emotions at that time. And as a result, preyed on me, who also was struggling with the loss of my dad being in the home. I had self-esteem issues because I was teased in school and things like that. So I was looking for someone to see me. And so this person groomed me, making me feel seen, but groomed me so that they could use me. And so that caused a lot of conflict between, of course, internally for me, because I didn't know if I was supposed to say something, not say something. This person was also very close to my mother. And so I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to.
How old were you?
I was 14 when the sexual abuse started. It happened by a pastor. And so I was also concerned about, is his church gonna come against me?
Right,
Like I
right.
just had so many thoughts about how he would be seen up here because he's seen as close to God, and I'm just that troubled teenager who just lost her dad, so no one's gonna believe
Wow.
me. And so I kept it to myself for 2 years and
Wow.
allowed it to continue from the age of 14 to 16, and I left home at 16, which I didn't want to do because I didn't want to leave my two sisters behind, but I
Right.
almost had to be honest with you, Kwanza, in order to maintain my sanity.
So you left home. Where'd you go? Did you go live with other relatives or?
I went to live with my dad until I graduated from high school. I still did not tell anyone until I turned
Wow.
18 um, of what happened to me. It affected me heavily, and I think
Wow.
my dad saw just in my mannerisms, the way I acted and engaged with people, that something was wrong, but I don't think he knew how to troubleshoot that
Right.
because it was new to him to have a teenager in the house. So
Exactly. And then his mind probably wouldn't have, I mean, leaned more to, oh, she's just a moody teenager, as
yeah,
opposed to like something as traumatic as sexual abuse have happened.
yes,
So who was the
absolutely.
first person that you like, who was the first person that you told and what compelled you to tell?
It was my dad,
Oh,
and
wow.
what compelled me was a Lifetime movie. We,
Really?
yeah, we were watching it together in the living room, and there was a rape scene.
Oh
And
my
it was
God.
brief, but it was too much for me at that moment. And I started to cry. And my dad he was just looking at me intensely. And so I noticed it and said, "Oh my goodness, this movie is just so sad." I was trying to
Wow.
deflect.
Right, right.
He continued to look at me intensely, and he was like, "No one cries that hard from just watching something like that." I mean, and I
Oh,
was sobbing, Kwanzaa. I just, everything just flooded my mind. Like, I know
right.
what she's getting ready to deal with. I know, like, there was some parts of that scene where she was conflicted on what she should do, say, and that's where I was in my life as well.
Wow.
So he, we contacted the authorities, but unfortunately, because of the time that passed, we were told that we would have to go through court in order to
Mhm.
prove
Oh,
what
wow.
happened. And because so much time had passed, there wouldn't be any evidence that they could like physically collect. I didn't do a rape kit after leaving
Right.
home or anything. And so my dad had to make a decision on my behalf on whether he wanted me to be dragged through court trying to prove myself, or if he just, wanted to help me in other ways. And so he decided that he didn't want me to go through um, trying to stand up against him on trial or in court.
Wow. Wow. So I guess as far as a court case, nothing was ever taken to the pastor. Like he didn't have to account for anything, answer to anything. It
Not
just,
at that time. So he was questioned by the authorities. They had to do like their own investigation, I guess, because we reported it.
right.
But because he and other people corroborated with his story and said that that he was an upstanding citizen and
Mhm.
all the things, all the
Right,
lies.
right.
They also told some stories about how I was troubled as a teen. So it just automatically painted a picture of me, criminalized me. Um, and
Wow.
my dad didn't want me to have to go through that. So
Right. And I guess that's when you hear that term victimizing the victim, like that sounds like
yes,
a sure case in point of that.
absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. And um the second time I told my story, Kwanzaa, was on a pageant stage.
Really?
But
So,
in between telling my dad and that time that I said it on a pageant stage, I struggled
oh my
so bad.
gosh.
I mean, because in my head, a pastor should tell the truth. If you
Right.
stand in front of a church, you're supposed to, because you read the Bible and you love God, you're supposed to go ahead and confess, right? I
Right.
really thought that was going to be the process. And when that didn't happen, I was so confused. I was frustrated a lot with God, but
Mhm.
I didn't blame God, but I was frustrated with God
Right.
because I was in a space at that time where I was questioning, are all these preachers and pastors, are they like legit?
Right. Right.
um,
Uh,
yeah, It was
Wow.
difficult.
I bet. So you graduated high school, I guess, attempting to put all of that behind you. And
It
now
was a
fast
serious
forward,
attempt.
right. But I can't even imagine all of the things that you had to deal with. Like you said, the fact that that the pastor didn't tell the truth, and then having to contend with your faith in the midst of, like, okay, how do I move forward even as a Christian? And from what I know, you are very strong in the faith, and I thank God for you. But
Yes.
it's like having to be able to really kind of contend for the faith in the face of, this pastor misusing and misabusing his position, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so what was that journey like? Sure, a lot of conversations, a lot of tears, a lot of
A lot of that, yes. And
yeah.
also, after graduating from high school, I did go straight into college. I went to an HBCU in North Carolina.
Okay.
And as a freshman, that was where I had a very serious suicide attempt where the ambulance was called to
Oh,
my dorm.
wow.
And it was quite embarrassing because I do remember going to the hospital on a gurney. I guess they found me in my
Wow.
room. I had taken over 100 pills.
Oh
I
my
was
gosh.
foaming at the mouth, had put on my favorite dress, locked the door, and wrote all these letters to family and friends, left them on my desk. My roommate had come back from class and couldn't get in, and that's how they knew that to like get into the room.
Right.
Found me, and taken out to the ambulance, and I remember faintly seeing girls standing in their dorm room door frames as I'm being rolled out. So of course, something like that is alarming, right? You want to know what
Yes.
happened and all of that. But I think in my head, I got frustrated because I thought to myself, where were y'all when I was struggling?
Mm.
Everybody's coming to look at me now, but none of you said anything to me that would encourage
Right.
me to get past this, right? But also, I couldn't blame them because they didn't know.
Right. So
But I didn't learn that.
what were some of the things, I mean, you said, where were you all when I was struggling? What were some of the things that you were dealing with? And
Mm-hmm.
were there signs that other people, could have picked up on?
Kwanza, there are always signs when someone's struggling. I
Yeah.
think, and that's why the advocacy and education is so important, because if we put this in front of people, they'll know, like, I've heard this before, I've seen this before, and I know that there's something behind it, and I need to be more forceful in how I support
Right.
this person. But I was, at that time, I wasn't going to church, so I didn't abandon God, but I kind of abandoned my faith and the automaticity of the structure that I had with my faith. And
Right.
I was like half dressing on the campus, snapping at people really bad. The young men on campus, and they might have been just trying to flirt or whatever, but
Right.
they could just say something as simple as, I like your dress. And I would go off in a
Wow.
way that was like unimaginable and unfair to them. Like a lot of times people walked away with this idea that I was crazy.
Right. Just confused, right?
Yeah, anyway, I just said I like your dress, but I
Wow.
wanted to know why are you looking at my dress? Why are you looking at me like that? Like I had issues still from
Oh,
my past. And I just think that between that and how I was withdrawn a lot and emotional often, that was
yeah.
all overlooked. But again, that's not the fault of the young ladies in the dorm. But at the time, I was frustrated.
And it's so interesting. I wrote my last book, Reflections of a Life Well Lived, and I wrote that in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Actually published it, like, went to publish in 2020. But in that, I share a story of me just like dating violence, and I had never shared this story before. It had been well over 20 years had passed. And I never forget, I was working with a friend of ours who was kind of helping me through the writing process. So I would write because I was on a timeline. But I remember sharing that chapter with her that I obscurely named 8 weeks, 2 days. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I named it something that if anybody's reading that book, they would have no idea what that means. So you have to
Yeah.
read the chapter. But it was like just burying this experience under as many layers as I could bury it.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, because Reflections of a Life was me kind of sharing different things from my life. and I didn't want to censor myself in that space. And so that was one of those stories. And every time I tried to write it, I would get physically ill. Every time I tried to write that story. And I remember sharing it with, of course, my husband read it, and my friend who was, helping to help me through this process read it. And both of them said, I explained one scenario, and both of them said, in this, you never mentioned the word abuse or rape. And I was like, because I didn't see it like, and again, burying it and masking it under all these other words, as opposed to just saying, this is what it was. And I remember part of that was, I had never considered that I had been raped. Never dawned on me. Never considered that I had been in a domestic, a dating violent relationship, and in that situation, it was a lot of choking and like holding down and slamming, but it was never like punching so I justified it in my mind that it wasn't that,
Right.
And I shared that because I think a lot of times we don't, for whatever reason, we try to say, oh, it's not what they experience. Like, that's real. This is something else.
Yes, absolutely.
But I tell you that the trauma of it is very real. So whether I wanted to call it anything or not, I remember I would hear like even somebody that sound like that person, and it would just be like, it was just very unsettling. No matter where and for years, I would hear a laugh, and this person was from Virginia, so they had like this, this kind of twang in their voice, and anytime I heard somebody with that, it was just be like, so I didn't realize the trauma of it until I start trying to write about it, and then kind of had to really face it. And so although I can't, I can't compare, and maybe I can, I don't know, the trauma that I experienced with where you were and what you were going through. But I do know for a fact that trauma is very real, and that it, certainly shows up and expresses itself in so many different ways.
Yes.
So, and then also, I think when you were talking about them taking you out on a gurney and the other girls looking at you, I found it really interesting. I think when I was an undergrad, I was doing an article about, actually even before that, I was doing an article about sexual abuse, and I think at that time the statistic was like 4 out of every 5 women will experience, and I was just like, so I imagine you on this gurney and you're going to pass all these women and you're looking at them, rightfully so, like, where were you when I was, struggling? But can you imagine how many of them?
How many of them?
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. And honestly, that was a part of my healing process and that's how I became so empathetic, to be honest.
Right.
That is one of the things that I'm so grateful to God for. He has truly made me such an empathetic person. I mean, I have empathy for even, sometimes it might even seem unreasonable, the things that people might say or do to me. And I'm like, you know what? It's okay.
Wow.
I'm going to support you anyway, or be kind to you anyway, because what I tell others often, and even those close to me, is they're going through something. If you felt inclined to treat me poorly, then you must be going through something. And you might need help. And I can't help you. There might be something in me that you have that has triggered you in a way that I can't control.
Yeah.
And so I think more like that now. I'm 41.
Right.
Yeah, I'm emphasizing that because at 21, it was very different.
Wow.
But you're absolutely right. The statistics are very high for the amount of girls and boys who are sexually abused, who are in domestic violence situations and households, as well as you said, I don't know if I can compare. The truth is, Kwanza, stories of trauma should not be compared, because trauma is trauma to each individual. It might have been 2 years for me and 2 minutes for someone else, and both traumas should be respected. Like, they should be honored, right? Because we both now have a healing journey that we have to go through. And the truth is, the more that we can galvanize people to go through that healing journey together and not compare,
Exactly.
the better off we'll be, and the more communities we can create where this is a safe space to have these
Amen.
current taboo conversations.
No, I love that. That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you saying that, because that is
Yes.
very true. So after you kind of went to the hospital and all that, like, did you finish school? Did you have to go back home? Like, what was the?
I found I for another year or so just kind of went through a season where I was just trying to figure myself out. But I
Right.
had this roommate who was actually one of my high school classmates. And she seemed very happy all the time. She went to church every Sunday. I went to her frustrated one day and said, "Why are you so happy?" I wanted answers like right now. And with a smile, I would never forget how she said it, what she looked like. She was just like, "Oh, I have a relationship with God." And I'm just thinking, well, yeah, me too, but I'm not as
Right.
happy as you. So she said, "Well, how do you know?" So we went into a little bit
Mm,
more of the dogma of
right.
the of faith and how to
Right.
know that you truly have a relationship with God. But it was then that I realized I'm not relying on God the way I think I should.
Mm.
And so she was the one that kind of reintroduced me to God, into church.
Amen.
And so college, after the suicide attempt, was a space for me to like regain my ground in my faith.
Wow.
Um, After leaving there, I moved to Maryland to become a teacher, and it was here that what would you know what happened? I was volunteering for all these organizations because after kind of establishing myself spiritually, I wanted to help people that
Amen.
encountered what I did. And so I started volunteering for local organizations that supported domestic violence and sexual abuse survivors. And I remember one day I was set up in the mall and at a table for Stop the Silence. I was
Oh,
their
wow.
international spokesperson, and we just had literature on the table that we were handing out to parents as they walked by. And I will never
Wow.
forget, I was incredibly frustrated because people would walk by the table and act like they didn't see us. Or sometimes parents would like shield or turn the faces of their children because they didn't want them to read what the table
Oh,
said.
wow.
I mean, it was to me, it was wild. And so I shared that frustration with someone who did come to the table. I said, "I don't understand why people are walking by and acting like they don't see us. This is information that they need." And she was actually into pageantry. And so she said, "You should try pageantry." And I was like, "Oh, I'm not." I was an English teacher. I like to read. Like
Right.
I don't think I'm the fit. And she went into encouraging me in a great way. She's like, "You have a great figure. You got a nice smile." And I was like, "Okay, but what's the benefit of this?" She said, "I could use pageantry to leverage what I was trying to promote in the mall." And I was like, that was the only thing
Exactly.
that got
Right.
me. She said, "When you have a crowded sash on, people will stop and talk to you." And she was right.
Yes. Yes.
So I've used pageantry to have those tough conversations in a safe way.
Wow.
And my first pageant was Mrs. Christian International because, honey, I was too saved to do just any pageant, okay? And the interview was on stage. It wasn't in private, kind of like I'm used to now, but the announcer walked up to me and he said, "What's the hardest thing you've had to overcome?" And I just blurted it out without
Oh
even
my
thinking, Kwanza.
gosh.
Like, I was like, and I thought to myself, did you just say that?
Especially at a Christian, that's powerful.
Christian audience, Christian judges, like everybody loves God in this room. And I just said, "A
Right.
pastor molested me."
Right.
Kwanzaa, the room got quiet. I just knew I did something wrong in that moment. And I was like, "Oh Lord, well, oh well, I tried." Like that's what I was thinking in
Wow.
my head. I actually won that pageant.
Wow.
And that was the start of pageantry for me and another level of pushing the message that
Yeah.
I had.
Wow. That is so good. And it's interesting because we didn't even stop the pause. Like, we talked about the statistics, like in the secular world, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't even stopped to pause to even think about the silence in the church,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which I don't think can be underestimated, because as we know, there's a lot that goes on, and pastors, just like everybody else, are human, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times in the degradation of their humanity, they do things that is not in line with their calling.
Yes.
But there's so many times where people don't say anything, and if they do say anything, they're not believed. And you think about, even as Christians, we don't put how do they always say, don't put your mouth on a man of God, and all that
Yeah.
stuff, right?
I was told don't talk about a man of God like that, like literally by family members when I would try to
Right.
talk about it in my family. It caused so much. It just the amount of cleanup required
Yeah.
is incredible in itself. That's why, Kwanzaa, there are so many causes out there and they're all important.
Right.
But and everybody who promotes whatever's important to them thinks that theirs is the most important.
Right. Right.
But when I tell you that these two issues are like almost underlying issues for a lot of the causes that
Yeah.
exist, even ones that you wouldn't even think. Like, for example, I had a conversation with a friend who's a breast cancer survivor.
Mm-hmm.
And I expressed to her that I felt that it was unfortunate that domestic violence was in the same month as breast cancer awareness,
Oh,
because they have a lot of support
right.
and we don't.
Right.
Um, I said, I feel like we need a month out that's not like a heavy awareness attached to it. And so she was like, well, they can both be important, or she said something in a way that made it seem like they're both important but separate. I said, have you ever heard of financial abuse?
Mm.
And she was like, well, I've heard about it, I don't really, so I told her, I said, there are breast cancer survivors in or breast cancer patients
Mm.
in domestic violence relationships where someone withholds the money that they need for their medical support.
Wow.
We don't talk about that because we think that all this money being raised is supporting all survivors. That's not true. Everybody doesn't have the same access. Everybody doesn't have the same financial backing to for them to be in a position to say, yes, I want to go forward with treatment. And some
Yeah.
people are in violent situations where they know they need the treatment, but they're afraid to say something because they're
Yeah.
afraid of their spouse or their intimate partner.
Or even thinking about like the recovery time. I mean, there's so many
Mm-hmm.
layers to it. Again, I had a friend on a couple of episodes ago, and she was breast cancer survivor, and she talked about, so she goes on Capitol Hill and she talks about that financial, what is the word she used? I can, but it's along those same lines of what you're talking about, like people not having enough resources,
Mm-hmm.
financial resources, to even get treatment. She talked about how, yeah, your medical insurance would pay for you to have your mammograms, but after that, where's the financial support to help you with treatment and help you to make the right decisions and all of that.
Yes.
But then also with regards to domestic violence, when you think about, one, is the woman going to the doctors? Are
Mm-hmm.
they,
Yes.
able to take that time away from the home? If they do even
Mm-hmm.
get down that part of the, down that path, how then are they treated while they're in recovery, where this is a time where you need someone to take care of you? Do
Yeah.
abusers stop to give you a chance to heal? Or are they dealing with that on top of, a domestic
Yeah.
violence situation, and then the child in the house? So it is so
And
layered.
some don't even make it to the hospital, Kwanzaa, because
Yeah.
a violent partner doesn't want you to be checked.
Wow.
They
Wow.
don't want a doctor to discover the bruises, the scars, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. So some people go untreated because they haven't been to a doctor because they're afraid to go to a hospital. So I said all that to say that I just and then there's a lack of funding for domestic violence unless like there's a lot of caveats to what a lot of the shelters have to do and offer and all of that in order to receive funding from the government and all of that. But, you know, as a person knowing this, experiencing it,
Right.
and walking into a grocery store and seeing everything is pink, it was just so
Yeah.
frustrating to me. I was just like, yo, we got a lot of things we got to talk about.
Exactly.
So that's why I'm here. I think the work I do, while it's being done by a lot of people and a lot of organizations, is still very much a, oh, that's nice that you're doing that kind of conversation, and people turn away. I've even been told in pageantry that this platform that I have and this topic could be too tough for audiences, and I often tell people that's why I'm going to continue having this conversation.
Yeah. What does that even mean? It's too tough. So it's too tough for them to hear it.
I think a lot of times people will pick things that might seem more pleasant or easier to digest.
Yeah, and probably something that's not because if we're being honest, all of us have experienced some, like how they say, everybody knows someone or someone who's been either sexually abused or have been in a domestic violence situation. So it becomes very personal because now I have the understanding and now I have to take action. Like I have to do something, you know, and a lot of people want to, you know, feign ignorance. Like, oh, I didn't know that was happening, you know.
Yeah. That happens a lot
Wow.
more than you know.
Oh my God. I actually I was sharing, it's funny I keep talking about this book, but I was sharing the first time that I had witnessed someone being abused. And I never forget, I actually share the story. I never forget, I grew up in inner city Philadelphia, West Philadelphia. And I never forget, it was a young man and his girlfriend. So his girlfriend and him were in his mother's house. And next thing you know, they came like busting through the door. Now in Philadelphia, it's like row homes. So, you know, it's people everywhere. So they come busting through the door and she's like running, she's screaming, he's chasing after her. He's reaching for her, grabbing her, you know, trying to get her. Nobody is doing anything. Like this is a summer day. Everybody's outside. Everybody, like as a kid, I'm watching this, like, what in the world? And he finally got a hold of her and he was like pounding her, you know, on the ground. And it was just like, but it was crazy for me because as a kid, it's like, what's happening and why isn't anybody doing anything? And I never forget asking my mother, like my mother and her friends, they were kind of sitting on the steps and they was talking about it afterwards. And I didn't even know how it broke up or how, you know, but you know, my mother and the other neighbors were talking about it afterwards. And I never forget asking my mom, I said, well, why didn't anybody do anything? And she said, oh, people don't like to get in other people's business like that. And that was it. And it was just like, And so as an adult, right, I see your expression as an adult. It's like, what do you mean? Like,
and even and I will say, Kwanza, I do understand the not wanting to put yourself in harm's way feeling. But there are things that you can do where you don't have to confront an abuser, right? Like calling the police in that moment for the person. And also, I just interviewed a survivor of domestic violence who's also a breast cancer survivor.
Oh, wow.
Who told me that her husband, boyfriend, fiance, I can't remember his role in her life at the time, but he was beating her so bad in their apartment above a neighbor that neighbor came up the back stairs to help her get out. That's the only reason she thinks she survived that situation. And so if that neighbor had not intervened, she believes that she would have lost her life in front of her children. Wow. And so that's why the education is important. How do I help people? Yeah. Even when it comes down to people who might not be
ready,
beaten in the moment, right? Okay. Like they might just tell you that this is happening to them at home, and then you might be in a space of what am I supposed to say or do? Offer them the resources, offer the support in specific ways, but don't try to take that on yourself because you're not in a position to physically pull that person out of the situation. So that's exactly why I talk about it so much.
I remember seeing this thing, And I think they have like put stuff in a bathroom where it's kind of like if you're being abused.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was call this number, because I think that was it was something else that you were to do, and it's ignorant that I can't recall it, but it was something more of not you having to call a number and try to get someone on the line, but a way for them to get in touch with you, to be able
Mm-hmm.
to help. And I have to find out what that was, but what are some of the, I guess, some of the, as an advocate, what are some of the things that you're advocating for? Not just, getting the information out there, but ways that, um, you know, survivors, victims of domestic abuse or sexual abuse, like what are some of the things you're advocating to help them get away from their abuser?
So I teach communities in general to be aware of signs. I think a lot of times, even without knowing what to do, sometimes people will like completely overlook that a person is struggling because they'll think that, oh, she always talks like that, or he always
Yeah.
acts like that. We got to move past saying, oh, that's just how they act, and
Right,
looking a little more deeply and saying, do they need help?
right.
And finding a way to offer that help in a non-intrusive way. And so I teach the signs. I teach about national resources like the National Domestic Violence Center for Abused Persons, as well as sexual assault organizations like RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. There's so many organizations that have opportunities
Right,
for you to get help without actually like going to the website or
right.
calling. And there's like text chatting now. There's numbers you can just text, and they
Oh,
won't respond
wow.
to you, but I think that might be what you saw in
I
the
think that's
bathroom.
exactly, yeah. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly it. Yeah.
And then also, I talk a lot, not just about helping victims, because if you're still in the situation, you're still being victimized.
Yeah.
I talk to survivors a lot because that's what I am.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people look at me and they're like, how in the world did you get there?
Yeah.
Because I don't look, act, or live like what I've been through. And
Amen.
so I teach a lot of strategies around healing, encouraging people that therapy is okay. I talk a lot about journaling, and specific ways of journaling in order
Yeah.
to promote positive mental health, using art as therapy as well. And so I just think it's important for us to have ways that we support ourselves, because I see a lot in the social media world of,
Right.
my friend hasn't reached out to me. They
Right.
not my real friend. Your friend might be struggling too.
Exactly.
And so we have to be in a space where we're not waiting on someone to call or text us, but we're in a space where, as a survivor, we're saying it's time to take back my own life and
Yeah.
not rely on or wait on someone else to tell me to get up.
Amen.
Yeah.
Wow. No, that's so much good information. And I know, to have that as your platform, as you're going through your pageants, and to have just been crowned Miss Maryland International, with that still very much your platform. I see you're repping
Yes.
that purple, and that's for domestic
Yes.
violence, right?
Yes.
Um,
20 years,
20
Kwanza.
years. That's
That's how long.
amazing. So we were talking before we recorded that you went out for Miss Maryland 20 years ago and you weren't successful.
So the first time I did it was in 2009.
Okay.
And I felt confident because there are a lot of pageant systems. People don't understand the pageant world
Right.
sometimes, but like you could be Mrs. Maryland years back to back, but they'll all be different pageant systems, right? I mean,
Oh,
if you won them all.
okay.
But I attempted this specific title in 2009, and I felt that the pageant system was best for me because they focus on platform work in your
Right.
service. And I said that if there's, because I don't want you looking, I think I'm beautiful. Thank you,
Yes.
Lord. But,
Yes.
I wanted people to look at my work more than they
Exactly. I
looked at
love
me.
that.
And so when I lost that pageant, I was like, okay, wait.
It wasn't a reflection on you, it was on a mantle, on a platform, on a work,
Yes.
right?
And Kwanza, what you see now, the amount of work that I do, I was like times 1,000 then, because
Wow.
you know how when you're a babe in Christ, you
Yeah,
first start to know the Lord, you want to read the whole Bible in one night, right?
exactly.
So that's how I started my advocacy. I was everywhere in Baltimore, Maryland,
Wow.
DC. I was driving every weekend to some event. I was speaking everywhere. I was like, there's no way anybody's gonna beat me in
Wow.
this.
Right.
Well, I got beat. And so I got coaching after that, pageant coaching, and I tried again in 2012 and I got beat again.
Oh, wow.
And the second time I got beat, I got my comments back from the judges, and one of the judges, this was, mind you, after I started a mentoring program for young ladies in my school district and abroad. I had gone all the way to Switzerland to mentor girls. And I talked about that in the interview
Wow.
for the pageant. And a judge wrote that I was too thin to represent young women or to be a role model for young women.
Really?
Yes. And I was thinking to myself, did you hear what I said?
Exactly. Like
I'm
you're already
already a role
doing it.
model for
Right.
young women. And so I'll be honest with you, that took me out the
Yeah.
game for a while. I was a little frustrated and took a very long break, like years.
Wow.
I came back slowly and I tried other pageant systems. I was successful in those because I guess people were like, you did what? They were impressed with all I had done.
Exactly.
But
Impressed by
those
what you've
weren't pageants
done.
that focused on that. And so
Exactly.
I was successful. I came back to this under a different director and I had the best experience this weekend. So
Oh, wow.
I just
Now,
thank God. He was like, okay, you're 24 now and you're like 26 now. Well, just wait till you're 41.
right. Like I have something for you. Now, you did
Yes.
briefly mention your mentoring program, which is the Queendom T.
Yes.
And then you also have your SheRose Awards.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about both of those?
Yes. So I started Queendom T.E.A in 2008 because as an educator, I was tired of hearing my
Wow.
stories come back to me. My story
Ooh.
of hurt and pain and
Yeah.
trauma was being retold to me through students. And then also I noticed that the girls like to stay at the school and talk to me about what they were experiencing. And I said, why don't I try to formalize this
Yeah.
somehow? It wasn't Queendom T initially. It was just me meeting girls after school to
Right.
listen and sometimes offer advice if they needed it. So I started that in 2008 and continued that through the pandemic. I halted it in the pandemic because I tried to do it on Zoom. It's just not the same
Exactly.
approach and touch that the girls needed. So, but also I started SheRose Awards in I think 2014 or 2016 because of that pageant experience I shared with you.
Yeah.
Um, I felt such a relief in sharing my story on that stage.
Right.
And I said to myself, I want to create an opportunity and space for other people to have a stage to share their
Yes.
own story on.
Yeah.
And so SheRose Awards was an opportunity for survivors to come forward with their story in a safe space and for the first time. And I kind of like embraced them leading up to it and after, and supporting them with how to tell their story, how to support themselves before and after. And I did that for several years and also stopped at the pandemic time.
Yeah.
But these are very much things that I would love to rekindle. I won't say that I'm 100% convinced that we should, that I should restart that right now.
Right.
But um, I do think it's important to find additional ways to
Yeah.
provide the advocacy and support. So that's how I did or why I did the art campaigns that we talked about as well.
Exactly. Wow. I'll tell you, I mean, just for me, like I said, just being on the sidelines of sorts, just watching you, it does feel like you are doing a million things, all great stuff, like honestly, all good stuff. So I love when when your posts come across. And I know that, even in doing anything, it doesn't come without its struggles, without its, challenges. But you
Mm-hmm.
always seem so gracious and always seem just always have a smile on your face. And I love that.
Thank you.
You are incredibly beautiful. But I think the inner you is, I mean, more beautiful than even the outside. Because I can just see, even the way that people respond to you, is just, really comes from a place of where you touch people at their heart. Like you really touch people in a really deep way. And it is only through your, like just your advocacy work, just through your authenticity, like all of that really shows. Now, if there is somebody that may be like looking at themselves, even going through it right now, that may, catch a glimpse of this, this conversation, and they say, well, she's beautiful, she's confident, because a lot of times when we're going through stuff, we can't see ourselves in other people because we're always like, they're so much better than us. But what is it that you would just say to a young lady? And I use the word young, just, but what is it that you would say to someone who may be going through dealing with self-esteem issues, may find themselves in the midst of, either getting out of or in the middle of, some kind of domestic situation, whether it's abuse or violence? Or what would you say to them? And that might be a huge question, but just some last thoughts or words that you might say of encouragement.
The first thing that I would say to them is healing is a lifelong journey.
Amen.
I think that a lot of times when people encounter me, they don't expect me to say what I say about my life because of what you mentioned. They'll see my appearance and maybe how I speak, how I put myself together, and they're like, oh, you can't possibly understand what I'm going through.
Right.
I understand it more than they can imagine, but I have spent my entire adult life working towards getting where I am right now. So there's not a destination. I am still healing myself from a lot of things. I work on myself daily. I maintain a lot of what I do. So you mentioned us being connected for a long time and seeing me do this work for years. I've seen people say, I'm a domestic violence advocate, and they stop after a while because it could be a lot, but you have to be in a space where you continue the journey, right? And then also I would tell them that this is my philosophy. We weren't born to stay on concrete. We were born to walk on gold. I always tell everybody I encounter that I think of concrete being symbolic for what everybody is experiencing and doing. But there is a level of elevation that we get to that's a golden place when you realize that you don't have to stay in that everybody's space. And that's where I am in my life. That's what people see when they encounter me. It's not that I'm better than anybody. It's just I accepted that position on that golden path.
I love that. I love that. I am so grateful just for your time. I'm grateful just to know you. I knew at some point, like I said, we've known each other for years, and I knew at some point that we would have an opportunity to just really, just talk. And I'm grateful that, that you said yes to my invitation, especially after coming off of such an amazing weekend.
Yes. And you even tried to encourage me. You were like, are you sure? I was like, well, I don't even know if I'm gonna win. So let's do it.
No, it was I'm like, I was following it all weekend. I'm like, okay. And then when I seen your post that you won, it's just like, yes. So definitely had a whole cheerleading squad. Just, we were watching it like it was, the finals or the Super Bowl, because every time you post, somebody was like, is anybody live? Is anybody there live? So.
Oh, and you know what, Kwanza, I think that is because I have been consistent for so long that people know that when I talk about these things, it's not coming from a space of just to win a pageant or just trying to be seen. Like, this is my life I'm talking about.
Exactly.
And I said that at the pageant too. They asked me, how do I inspire people? I said, by being myself.
I love
this pageant isn't going to change what I do. I'm going to continue what I've been doing with or without that crown.
Yes. And now you have the how you say, when you put the crown and the sash on, people pay attention. I think people have already been paying attention, but for those who need to see you in your fullest glory, well, here they go. Because I'm sure you're going to break I mean, you know, just so many more boundaries and so many more ceilings, and educate so many more people and heal so many more people just through your continued testimony, your continued perseverance, your continued commitment to the causes that you've been called to. And just know I'm on the sidelines just cheering you on, praying for you.
Yes,
Like I
thank
know
you.
so many other people are. But I want to thank you so much again. Let you go get some rest.
Thank you.
Hopefully you can just watch, you know, stay on this beautiful celebration space, and but you know, definitely taking care of yourself and get some well-deserved rest. And yeah, I just thank you so much for sharing your testimony. I'm going to share like all the links of how people can follow you, how they can support you
Okay.
through your different charity, you know, endeavors, through your different efforts with your art and everything. I just want people to know you, to follow you, to support you, and they will grow to love you because you are absolutely a jewel, not just to the body of Christ, but just to
Oh,
humanity. So blessings
thank
to
you.
you, Miss LaQuisha Hall, the Miss
Thank you.
Maryland International. Love you so much. And I'm so incredibly proud of you, and so proud to be able to call you friend.
Yes,
Can I
thank
call
you.
you
And
friend?
thank you. Yes, you are my friend, my sister, my queen friend. We could be all
Yes.
that.
Exactly, exactly. So thank you guys so much for joining us. This was such a just a full conversation. We probably could have talked for hours, but
Yes.
our queen needs to get some rest. But thank you guys
And
so much.
thank you for inviting me, Kwanza. And I'd be
Absolutely.
happy to come back
Amen.
to
Amen. Well,
continue the conversation.
exactly. Well, I'll tell you what we have planned for 2023. So we'll talk more about that. And hopefully you could be a part of that. That's going to be exciting.
Okay.
Yes. But thank you guys. I'll have all her links, all her contact information. Definitely follow her. You will, I mean, if you're looking to be inspired just every day, being engaged with someone who is engaging, definitely follow her, support her. Just do all the things that we do when we love our, you know, our influencers. You know, she's doing some great work. So blessings to you guys. Hopefully you got something from it. And until next week, blessings.